Okay, this is a quick tutorial on consolidating databases and eliminating duplicates for our ACT database system. What we're going to be doing here is basically just taking a couple samples from a pair of different databases that we have going and show you how to basically eliminate duplicates or very, very similar entries. Really helps keeps things simple. Saves time, maintains the efficiency when we're trying to look for contacts, for example, or different businesses that we need to keep in touch with or market to. So getting started, what we're going to be doing is when you start this process, you're probably going to be given a couple of exports from an ACT database, or more than one ACT database in this case. You can see I have two Excel files here in this folder. And what we're going to be doing is, before we get started, what you're actually going to want to do is, if you look at my Excel ribbon up here, you'll notice you've got all the normal tabs and a couple more things. What we're going to be focusing on today is the AbleBits data plugins, and if you don't have these in your Excel toolkit, what you're going to want to do is just open up a web browser, look up AbleBits, and you can find their page. It's here, it's the first result, and you want to click on add-ins for Microsoft Excel. And they have a whole list of things that they make, a bunch of useful tools, but we're looking for two very specific ones, and what they are Combined Rows Excel and Fuzzy Duplicate Finder. That second one sounds kind of funny, and we'll get to it later, but you can just Control F on the web page and find them. So if I want find fuzzy matches, free download. It's a trial, and it doesn't matter that it's a trial, you don't need to use it for too long, so just go ahead and download that. And the other one that we want is Combine Rows, and for some reason it just doesn't come up. Here we go. Merge duplicate rows based on unique ID, so this is what we want as well. Now, the process is actually not that complicated. What you first need to do when you get started with this is to just make sure you have both your sheets open, and a very useful feature that Excel has for this is that you can actually unsnap your window from the main window for Excel. And what that lets you do is compare the column headers, and this is actually important in this case, because if you pay careful attention, what you'll notice is that the two different tables have different headers. So in this case we have code, company, contact, address, city, so on and so forth, whereas here there's an extra Scots column. And in this case what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pulling data from this L5 sample sheet into the L5 Scots sample sheet, and so I'm actually going to be not deleting this Scots ID column, but in some cases you might have to remove a column, in some cases you might have to add a column to your database. It depends on what's being asked of you. So just make sure that you're clear on that, and you should be good. So in this case what I'm going to be doing is, as I mentioned, copying data from this sheet. If I can find it and drag it down. I don't know what's going on here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. There's the top of it. So what we're just going to do is we're going to highlight the data, and I myself know that the rest of the columns in the sheet are actually matching with the other spreadsheet. So I'm only going ahead because I'm sure, but otherwise I'd be looking through every single one of these columns, making sure that they matched up with the other one, and then I'd be moving on towards the next step. Another difference that I just spotted, actually, I did lie about knowing everything about the spreadsheet. There is two different columns for contact in the Scots sheet, and there's only one for the contact in the other sheet. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy them, and we'll get to work on that a bit later. So scroll down to the bottom of the data here. I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to move the ID column to match the ID column of the first sheet, of the Scots sheet that we just pasted into. So Control X, Control V. There we go. Now there's just a Scots ID column here that's empty in the second set of data, and that's fine. You don't have anything to fill it with, so don't. The other thing that's sort of interesting here is that the contact one last name field is now filled with irrelevant information. So what we want to do is we want to take all these cells, starting at that contact ID second name, and make sure we're down to row 79, which is where this data set ends, I believe. Yep. Just make sure that we've got the last column as well. So X79 is the furthest column that we need to use here. We're just going to go all the way over here, cut, and paste. Yep. So that's looking a lot better. So if you're paying attention, you notice that address line 1 now has an address in it, city has a city in it, province, postal code, so on and so forth. The column names are all matched up with the column data, which is exactly what we want. We can now move on to actually using these tools, the AbleBit tools, to help us consolidate the databases. So what this entails is basically, hang on, let me just maximize this. We only need to use this sheet now, so you can go ahead and close the other one. Save changes if you need to, don't save changes if you're not supposed to. Just make sure you do your due diligence in terms of keeping your files safe and all that. Please excuse my phone, just went off there, but what we're going to do now is find some fuzzy matches, which sounds like a fun time, but it's really just looking for information. And what this basically means is fuzzy basically just means that the lines that we use to distinguish one piece of data from the next are blurry. They're fuzzy. So for example, if I had two cells and the first one had the word, I don't know, bit in it, and the next one had the word bin in it, you can see that these two words are pretty similar. 2 out of 3 letters are the same. And in this case, if you look at the fuzzy duplicate finder, it's got a range selector, which we'll get to in a second, and it's got, more importantly, a max number of different characters. So in this case, if I were to highlight these two items, and you can see that the range selector actually followed me there, so you don't actually have to touch it ever really, just drag over whatever group of cells that you want to use and it'll figure it out for you. If I were to select these two and I set this to max number of different characters 0, then it wouldn't find, or in this case it did, because I guess 0 is not something that it actually cares about. However, let's just make this a little bit more complicated. Little and brittle. So you can see that these two are 2 characters different. So instead of an L, we have a BR. Let's just see what happens when we select the 2 of these and try to find a fuzzy match. So if I say max number of different characters 1, let's see what happens. It'll say there are no fuzzy duplicates in the selected range. So what it's looking for is words that are pretty similar, not necessarily exactly the same. If 2 words are exactly the same, they'll still come up. But if they're 2 different, given what you've written here, in this case 1, then they won't actually be found. And all this says is that I want there to be at most 1 different character between the 2 words. So if I change this to 2, which is the actual difference between these 2 words, and I search for typos, ta-da, it comes up with little and brittle. So these 2 words are similar enough, based on the criteria that we gave the fuzzy duplicate finder plugin, that it'll actually return it'll return results, and we can use those results to change what's in the spreadsheet. Other things that you don't necessarily have to pay attention to: minimum number of characters in a word or cell. This just says that if the cell has 2 or more characters, the fuzzy tool should look at it. You know, if I set this to 14 and I highlighted these 2, there are no fuzzy duplicates. So it's only looking at cells that have 14 or more characters. Typically, you could set this to 2 or 3, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Just set it to 3 or less, and you should be good. 2 or less, maybe, if there's a company or something with a 2-letter name. But usually, that's not the most common occurrence. So 2 should be fine. You don't need to set a delimiter. This is more advanced stuff that we don't need to worry about right now. We don't delimit any of the fields in a database with specific symbols. I don't believe we have rules like that, so everything should be fine. And what we're actually going to do here is use fuzzy duplicate finder. And the usefulness here comes from, say, if I had 2 entries for the same company, or 2 entries for the same company that has addresses at different locations. So for example, something common would be, I don't know, TD Bank. TD Bank might have been written like this, it may have been written like this. It could have been written like this because someone was a bit too heavy on the caps, or they missed it or something. Whatever. The point is, if we look at these 3, they're pretty much exactly the same but very subtly different. If we search for the typos, it'll give us the three things that it found that are vaguely similar to TD Bank. And what we want to do is pick the one that we actually want. So we say, oh, you know, this one isn't quite right, this one isn't quite right either, but this is how TD Bank actually spells their name and how we'd like it to be displayed in our database. So if we just click this check mark here under the action column, what it'll do is come up with the correct value. It'll say, okay, we're going to change it to the one that the user selected, and all we need to click now is apply. And if you look at the spreadsheet, all the spelling and all the capitalization is corrected. And that's what the fuzzy duplicate finder is doing for us, and that leads into the next thing that we need to do, which is actually consolidate rows. And all this really does is it says, so if I come up with combine rows, it's gonna say select your table. So if I do that, oh, that's not quite what I want. Yep, that is actually quite what I want. Did it select the whole thing? Yep, looks like it. So yeah, it selected all 79, 80 columns of this table, or rows of this table. And I'm going to click next. And it's going to say choose key columns of duplicate records. And what a key column is the column that you want to identify your search by. So for example, if I wanted to search by, or if I wanted to identify columns by the code here, I would hit code here. I could select all, but that's kind of useless because no 2 entries are going to be exactly the same, or I could unselect all in case I selected too many things. But in this case, what we're going to be going by is the company name, the address, and the postal code, as these are 3 things that are going to be pretty consistent among entries. So for example, if you have two entries for RP printers company limited, and if you have if you have those 2 entries for this one company and they're very slightly different, the address might be written slightly differently, road might be in short form or long form, or there might be capitalization errors in the postcode. Any sort of minor discrepancies like that are still fine, because the tool will be able to match them up and remove the duplicates. So that's why we use these 3 columns. So just remember that you're supposed to use the company name, the address line, or the first line of the address rather, and the postal code. So I'm going to click next and move on. And you're going to choose columns with the value to merge, and we want to merge pretty much everything. And we're going to click finish when we're done, and you do want to skip the empty cells and delete the duplicate values, which is the whole point of this exercise. So if I click finish, 78 rows have been processed, 8 duplicate rows have been combined into 4 rows, 70 unique rows have been left unchanged. So I can't show you exactly which rows the program worked on there, but suffice it to say that what's basically happened is, as we described, we don't have any more duplicate companies or duplicate entries in the table, and that's the whole point. So if we were to look up RP Printers Company Limited, the only time we'd see it more than once would be if they had different locations. So for example, if they had an address at 7270 Bramley Road and they had another one somewhere in Toronto as this location's in Mississauga, or somewhere in some other part of the country or the world. And that's the only time we really should be seeing duplicates. In other cases, the duplicate is probably because we've merged a database and we've tried to consolidate, but we haven't actually got through all the duplicates. Or if someone accidentally entered the same thing twice, or by some mistake of their own, managed to put in 2 entries for the same thing. That creates problems, obviously, and we'd like to get rid of those problems, which is why we use these 2 tools to consolidate the databases. Once you're done, just let whoever asked you to do this know that you're done, and they'll be able to take the Excel files off you and merge them back into the database. I hope the video was helpful, and thank you for watching.